My in-laws tried to have me deported to take my kids. The judge read their texts aloud in open court. The first text the judge read aloud made my mother-in-law smile. The second made my father-in-law stop looking at the courtroom. But the third was so quiet that I could hear my 6-year-old daughter breathing beside me. The judge adjusted her glasses and read, "Once she's out of the country, the children will have no choice but to stay with us." My mother-in-law's face went white. My father-in-law slowly turned toward her. And suddenly, the same people who had spent months telling everyone that I was an unstable immigrant mother were the ones begging the judge not to continue reading. But the judge did. Because those messages were real. And every word was proof that my in-laws had tried to destroy my life. They had reported me to immigration. They had lied to child services. They had tried to convince my husband that I was dangerous to our children. And when none of that worked, they had planned to get me deported. They thought that once I was gone, my children would belong to them. They never expected their own phones to be the reason they lost everything. My name is Elena. And this is the story of how my in-laws tried to take my children from me, only to have their secret plan exposed in open court. I met my husband, Daniel, when I was 24 years old. I had come to the United States from Colombia 2 years earlier to finish my degree and start building a life for myself. Daniel was kind, patient, and completely different from the men I had dated before. He listened when I spoke. He remembered small things. And when I told him I was afraid of getting too attached because my future in the United States still felt uncertain, he looked me in the eyes and said, "Then we'll figure it out together." I believed him. Maybe that was my first mistake. Not marrying Daniel. But believing that loving Daniel meant his family would eventually love me too. At first, his parents seemed welcoming. His mother, Margaret, hugged me tightly at our first Christmas dinner. His father, Robert, joked that he had finally gotten the daughter he never had. I thought I was lucky. Then Daniel and I had our first child. Everything changed. Margaret became obsessed with my son, Leo. At first, I thought it was normal. She wanted to babysit. She bought him expensive clothes. She took hundreds of pictures. But then the comments started. "You hold him too much. Maybe he needs more time with his real family. You're too emotional with him." The first time she said real family, I actually laughed because I thought I had misunderstood. I hadn't. Margaret looked directly at me and smiled. "I just mean Daniel's side. You know how important blood connections are." I felt Daniel stiffen beside me. But he said nothing. And I wish I could tell you that he immediately defended me. I wish I could say he set boundaries with his parents. But Daniel had spent his entire life trying to keep them happy. Whenever I complained about something Margaret said, he always gave me the same answer. "That's just how Mom is." Then I became pregnant with our second child, our daughter Sophie. And Margaret became worse. She criticized the food I ate. The way I dressed. The way I raised my children. But what she hated most was that I spoke Spanish with them. One afternoon, while I was reading to Leo, Margaret interrupted me. "English, Elena." I looked up. "I'm teaching him both languages. He lives in America. So do I." Her smile disappeared. "You know what I mean." That was the moment I finally understood. Margaret didn't think I was family. I was an outsider who had somehow taken her son. And she had been waiting for a reason to get rid of me. Daniel and I separated when Leo was 5 and Sophie was 3. It wasn't because of one dramatic betrayal. It was years of exhaustion. Years of arguments. Years of Daniel promising he would handle his parents but never actually doing it. The separation was difficult. But at first, we were respectful. We agreed on shared custody. The children stayed with me most of the week and spent weekends with Daniel. And for the first few months, it worked. Then Daniel started coming back from his parents' house angry. He accused me of turning the children against him. He claimed Leo was becoming confused because I spoke Spanish. He started questioning every decision I made. I knew exactly where it was coming from. One evening, I finally asked him, "Is your mother telling you these things?" Daniel went silent. That was enough. But I didn't know how deep it went. A few weeks later, my friend Amanda called me. Her voice was shaking. "Elena, did someone come to your apartment today?" "No." "Why?" "There were 2 people outside. They were asking about you." My stomach dropped. When I got home, there was a business card under my door. It belonged to an immigration investigator. At first, I thought there had been some mistake. My immigration status was legal. I had filed every document. I had receipts, records, an attorney. Everything. Still, I called the number. The investigator told me they had received an anonymous report claiming that I had committed immigration fraud. Someone had alleged that I had falsified information to remain in the country. I almost laughed. Then I realized someone wanted me to be afraid. I hired an attorney. Within 2 weeks, the complaint was dismissed completely. My attorney told me that whoever had filed the report had provided almost no evidence. It was a malicious complaint. A waste of government resources. But I couldn't stop thinking about one question. Who would do something like that? I asked Daniel directly. He denied everything. His parents denied everything. Margaret even hugged me. "Oh, Elena," she said softly. "Whoever did this must be a horrible person." And I believed her. For another month. The next attack was worse. One morning, I received a call from Child Services. Someone had accused me of neglecting my children. They claimed I left them alone for hours. They claimed my apartment was unsafe. They claimed I was emotionally unstable. And then they said something that made my blood run cold. The anonymous caller had specifically mentioned my immigration status. According to the report, I was supposedly at risk of disappearing from the country. The implication was obvious. They wanted the authorities to see me as a threat. Not just to myself, but to my children. A caseworker came to my apartment. She inspected everything. She spoke with my children. She contacted Leo's school. She spoke to my neighbors. She interviewed me twice. And after nearly a month, the case was closed. Unfounded. No neglect. No danger. Nothing. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I was terrified. Because now I knew someone was trying to build a pattern. First, the immigration complaint. Then the child neglect complaint. Then the accusations that I was unstable. It was like someone was throwing mud against a wall, hoping that eventually something would stick. I confronted Daniel again. This time, he got angry. "You think everything is my parents. Because everything keeps happening after they get involved. You have no proof." And he was right. I didn't. Not yet. But then, one night, my son told me something that changed everything. Leo had just come back from his father's house. He was quiet. Too quiet. I asked him if something was wrong. He looked at me and whispered, "Grandma says we might have to live with her soon." My heart stopped. I tried to keep my voice calm. "What do you mean?" He shrugged. "She said you might have to go away." I asked him where. He looked confused. "Back to your country." I felt sick. My 6-year-old son had just casually repeated my greatest fear. And someone had planted it in his mind. I called Daniel. For the first time since our separation, I screamed at him. He denied knowing anything. But I could hear something in his voice. It wasn't anger. It was panic. Then he said something strange. "You need to stop accusing my parents." I went completely silent. Because I hadn't mentioned his parents. Not once. 3 weeks later, Daniel's cousin contacted me. Her name was Rachel. We had never been particularly close. But that afternoon, she asked if we could meet somewhere private. When I arrived at the cafe, she looked terrified. She kept checking the door. Then she placed her phone on the table. I don't know how to tell you this. My hands started shaking. Rachel had recently been helping Margaret set up a new phone. While transferring messages, she had seen something. A conversation between Margaret and Robert. Rachel had taken screenshots. Then she handed me her phone. The first message was dated months earlier. Before the immigration complaint. Margaret had written, "If Daniel won't get rid of her, we may need to force the issue." My breathing became shallow. The next message was from Robert. "If she loses her status, she loses everything here." Then Margaret replied, "Exactly. And the kids stay. She can't take American children out of the country." I couldn't speak. Rachel looked at me. "There are more." I scrolled. There were discussions about contacting immigration. About making anonymous reports. About convincing Daniel that I was unstable. And then I found the message that destroyed me. Margaret had written, "We need her out before she turns the kids completely against us." Robert replied, "Once she's deported, we petition for grandparents' rights. Daniel can have full custody until she gets herself sorted out." Margaret answered, "And if she doesn't come back?" Robert wrote, "Then the children are already here." I stared at those words. Then I began to cry. Not because I was scared. Because suddenly everything made sense. Every accusation. Every report. Every strange argument Daniel had started. They weren't random. My in-laws had been running a campaign against me. And they had involved my children. Rachel begged me not to tell anyone that she had shown me. She was afraid her family would turn against her. I promised I would protect her identity. Then I went straight to my attorney. And that was when the situation changed. Because my attorney looked at the screenshots for less than 10 minutes before saying, "Elena, if these messages are authentic, this isn't just a family dispute." She leaned forward. "This is a coordinated attempt to interfere with your legal rights and potentially manipulate child custody." For the first time in months, I felt something besides fear. I felt prepared. I wanted to show Daniel the messages immediately. My attorney told me to wait. The evidence needed to be preserved properly. Then something unexpected happened. Daniel found out before I told him. Margaret called him. Apparently, Rachel had confronted another family member. The secret had started to unravel. Daniel showed up at my apartment late that night. I almost didn't open the door. When I did, he looked completely broken. "Tell me it's not true." I said nothing. He held up his phone. Rachel had sent him some of the screenshots. His hands were shaking. "My mother didn't do this." I looked at him. "You tell me." For almost 10 minutes, he stood there silently. Then he sat down on the floor. And cried. That was the first time I understood something important. Daniel hadn't known the full plan. But he had been manipulated. His parents had spent months feeding him doubts. Telling him I was planning to take the children away. Telling him I was hiding things. Telling him I couldn't be trusted. They had weaponized his fears. And while Daniel was responsible for allowing them to influence him, he wasn't the mastermind. Margaret and Robert were. Daniel eventually agreed to cooperate with my attorney. And that was when Margaret made her biggest mistake. She didn't know Daniel had seen the messages. So she kept texting him. She urged him to seek emergency custody. She told him I was becoming dangerous. Then she wrote, "If you love those children, you cannot let her take them if they deport her." Daniel replied, "What are you talking about?" And Margaret answered, "You know exactly what we're trying to prevent." Daniel showed the message to our attorney. And our attorney simply smiled. Because Margaret had just confirmed that there was a plan. A plan involving my possible deportation. A plan to take my children. And now, a judge was going to hear about it. The hearing was originally supposed to address custody. But after our attorney presented the evidence, the case became much larger. Margaret and Robert arrived together. Margaret wore a pale blue suit. Robert looked confident. Too confident. They still believed they could explain everything away. Their attorney argued that the messages had been misinterpreted. He claimed Margaret was simply worried about her grandchildren. He said the conversations were emotional family discussions. Nothing more. Then the judge asked the question that changed the entire room. Did either of you submit or encourage anyone to submit reports regarding Ms. Elena's immigration status? Margaret immediately said no. Robert said no. Their attorney repeated the denial. Then my attorney stood. "Your Honor, we would like to introduce additional evidence." The judge nodded. My heart was pounding. I could barely look at the screen as the messages appeared. First, the message about forcing the issue. Margaret shifted in her chair. Then the message about me losing my status. Robert whispered something to his attorney. Then the judge began reading. Out loud. Every word. The courtroom was silent. She read, "If she loses her status, she loses everything here. Then, the kids stay." Margaret's face changed. The judge continued. "Once she's out of the country, the children will have no choice but to stay with us." And that was the moment I had imagined 1,000 times. Margaret whispered, "Please." The judge looked directly at her. "Excuse me?" Margaret swallowed. "Those messages don't mean what they sound like." The judge didn't respond. She simply continued reading. Then came the message that ended everything. Robert had written, "If Daniel won't do what needs to be done, the government will." The judge stopped. She looked directly at Robert. "What exactly did you mean by that?" Robert's mouth opened. Then closed. His attorney stood. "Your Honor, my client would like to clarify," but the judge raised her hand. "No. I would like Mr. Thompson to answer." Robert looked toward Margaret. She wouldn't look at him. Finally, he said, "I meant, legally." The judge asked, "Legally how?" He had no answer. And in that silence, everyone in the courtroom understood. They had been caught. The judge did not immediately issue a final ruling. She ordered a further investigation into the reports made against me. She also ordered that Margaret and Robert have no unsupervised contact with my children while the matter was reviewed. Margaret started crying. For months, she had told everyone that I was trying to keep her grandchildren away from her. Now the judge was doing exactly that. Not because I asked. Because of what she had done. Outside the courtroom, Margaret tried to approach me. For the first time in my life, she looked afraid of me. "Elena, please," she said. "We can work this out." I stopped walking. Then I said something I had waited years to say. "You had months to work things out." She started crying harder. "We were scared." "No," I said. "You were scared of losing control." And then I walked away. 3 months later, the investigation confirmed that the false reports against me had been deliberately coordinated. My immigration status was never in danger. The allegations against me were unfounded. The judge granted me primary custody. Daniel retained parenting time under a revised agreement. He had finally separated himself from his parents. And Margaret and Robert? Their access to my children became limited and supervised. The people who had planned to remove me from my children's lives were no longer allowed to be alone with them. I remember the day the final order arrived. I sat at my kitchen table. Leo and Sophie were playing in the next room. And for the first time in almost a year, I wasn't waiting for another letter. Another accusation. Another government investigator. Another lie. The nightmare was over. I looked at my children. Then I realized something. My in-laws had spent all that time believing I was vulnerable because I came from another country. They believed I could be scared into silence. They thought my immigration status made me weak. They thought I had no family powerful enough to protect me. But they were wrong. Because the moment they tried to use the law against me, they forgot something. The law works both ways. And sometimes, the people writing the secret plan forget that secrets leave evidence. My mother-in-law wanted me deported. She wanted my children to grow up believing I had abandoned them. My father-in-law thought that once I was gone, they could simply step in and take my place. But in the end, I didn't have to expose them. They exposed themselves. With their own words. With their own texts. Read aloud, in open court. And as the judge finished reading those messages, I looked at Margaret. I saw the exact moment she understood. The plan was over. She wasn't going to take my children. She wasn't going to control Daniel anymore. And she wasn't going to destroy my life. Because the verdict had finally arrived. And this time, it was for her. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to Calm Verdict Stories, where every silence hides a truth, every secret leaves a trail, and every truth eventually leads to a verdict. This story is a dramatized fictional narrative created for storytelling and entertainment purposes.